Hello, I'm Natalia Bilbao, and this is LA Currents. Since 2013, Bob Blumenfield has been the council member for CD3 and has made it his mission to carry out initiatives to help the families and businesses in the area thrive. I'm excited to be joined today by Bob himself. Thank you so much for being here to talk about the different projects and future plans for CD3.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So let's start with a very popular project, the Tiny Homes or Cabin Communities Initiative, as you call it. How is the Sycamore Cabin Community progressing?
We've got 2 cabin communities now in my district, and they're both doing really well. This was an idea I had seen in Riverside, talked to the mayor there almost 2 years ago, and really thought it would make sense to bring it to LA City, but specifically to my district. And we have one cabin community right behind my district office where we have about 52 cabins. That has been up and running since June, so relatively new, but it's full. A lot of folks are having their lives transformed. They're no longer on the street. They're living in these cabins. They're getting services, 3 meals a day, shower, restrooms, the whole 9 yards in terms of that. And it's making a difference, and it's not having a negative impact on the community as some people feared. We've been working very closely with the community to make it really integrate in the community as much as possible. And then we have a second cabin community, which we're calling Sunflower. The first one we call Sycamore, and that's in Tarzana, right off the Orange Line. And that one just opened up a couple of weeks ago, and so it's not full yet. They're onboarding folks slowly and deliberately, and in a way that they bring people in, they explain all the rules to them. It's a process, but it's a good process because that way folks understand the expectations about being in that cabin, and they go in willingly.
And I know you had the experience of actually spending, was it a night in one of the cabins?
Yes, yeah.
First-hand experience?
Yeah, no, I wanted to know, and Hope of the Valley offered this as they're the service operator. They put together a night before it officially opened for the clients. They put together a night where myself and some of the board members there, some members of the press, we all basically were able to spend the night there to get a sense of what that's really like. And obviously it's not the same exact experience that someone is going to have when you've been living on the streets, because you know going in it's just one night, but I got to get the flavor of it, and I can tell you it was a comfortable bed. It had air conditioning, heat, Wi-Fi. There was a short walk across the way to the restrooms. Showers were nice. I mean, it was. I've had a lot worse camping experiences in my life than this. This is above glamping. When you think about camping experiences, but it for someone who's living on the streets, it's transformative. And I've talked to a lot of people who are in the cabins and who.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Yeah.
What's the feedback been?
The interesting thing is the amenity that is most important to someone who's been on the streets is not what you might think. It's not the showers or the meals.
I was going to say showers and meals first.
Yeah, that's what most people would think. But
Yeah.
the thing that gets cited time and time again is something very small. It's a lock. It's having a locking door so that you can sleep at night without fear of being rousted or a predator or someone coming by. And just that tiny little lock, a little piece of metal, makes all the difference in the world for someone who's had to live for days, weeks, months, years, with one eye open, basically. And people describe their experience of sort of finally being able to rest and getting, and that's part of the process. Get people out of survival mode and into, future mode, and saying so folks can stop thinking about just how do I get through the day and how do I find a meal and how do I avoid being a victim to, okay, I'm in a location, it's a stable environment, people are here to help. How do I move forward in my future? How do I get ultimately an apartment? How do I get my ID or my, look for work or whatever it is that person needs to do, or if they're having struggles with addictions, how do I deal with those issues?
Yes, because you have counseling too, I read that, and also I think 24/7 security, so the security aspect is taken care of, and also mental health counseling and like you said, help finding jobs.
Yeah, so each person who's in one of these cabins has a caseworker, and part of the condition of being in that cabin is that you're working toward your case, that you are out of survival mode and you're into future mode, and so all the folk and working toward your case means something very different to different people, but that's what keeps people in that cabin, is that they are working for their future. And it's not meant to be a forever home by any means. It's not designed to be. And in fact, by design, it's made rather sparse, because it's meant to be a transition from someone who's been living on the street, somewhere that's comfortable but not so comfortable that they don't want to move on. And
that's an interesting balance.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it was designed, like the cabins themselves were designed by folks who were formerly homeless. There's a company that involved folks who were formerly homeless in the design, and there's been a lot of thought into how these communities, not only the cabins themselves are constructed, but how the community is put together. Thought by the provider and by folks, but also the local community has had input. I have for each of the cabin communities in my district, I have a cabin community committee comprised of local members of the community, many of whom were in opposition to the cabins coming in, but who we were able to convince and say, look, if they're coming in, don't you want to at least be part of the solution? Don't you want to be part of making sure that it does work with the community? And folks took that on and came up with some great ideas. If you go to the cabins, you'll notice the outside is not a simple fence, but it has greenery all around the outside.
There are trees. I heard that you've kept the trees where they
certainly
were.
Kept all the trees on the inside, but even the fence on the outside, it looks like a hedge. And in fact, that was one of the suggestions by the members of the cabin committee. Another suggestion was to have the security cameras not just facing inward, but also outward, sort of around the immediate area, so that folks would feel more secure about the cabins being there. Things like that the committee has come up with, and then some of the committee members have gone an extra step, and one of the members was working with other volunteers to design curtains for all of the cabins, and they want people to not only feel at home, but they recognize that one of the issues was light coming into the cabin, so they designed these curtains, and they're...
And that same, I guess, feeling of privacy, you mentioning that the lock is the most important thing, it's also like very telling of what they're really looking for in this cabin communities.
Yeah, so the cabins are a great part of the menu. They're not the solution to homelessness by any means, because at the end of the day, it's transitional. You need to have something to go to after that, but they're an important part of the
They're like
menu.
a stepping stone. I love what you said about it's get them out of survival mode and into future mode. I think that should be a quote in your office. Like, frame that.
I like that. No, because that's really what it is. It's getting, and when you get someone out of survival mode, not only is that good for them as an individual, but that's really important for the surrounding community, because someone in survival mode is the kind of person who might break into your car. Not necessarily, I'm not saying that, but someone who's in survival mode is going through your dumpster. All the things that we get complaints about are oftentimes, or many of the things we get complaints about are complaints about actions that are taken by someone who's in that survival mode. And just that act of getting that person off of the local street and into a place where their survival needs are taken care of and they can focus on the future is game changing.
And even like their pets are taken care of. There's also room for pets to live there as well.
That's a great observation. One of the things that we found, and not that me and my team figured this out, but I mean that folks in general have realized over time, is that some of the barriers to folks accepting shelter or accepting transitional or even permanent shelter has to do with their pets or a loved one not being able to shelter. A lot of times shelters are divided by gender, so people aren't willing to give up their family, which is understandable. And whether that family is a pet or a spouse or a loved one, these cabins allow folks, if they're a couple, they can share a cabin. If you have a pet, there is a dog run on site. you're allowed to have a pet. So it deals with some of those issues that have traditionally been barriers. And this is not only true for the cabins, but also we built a bridge home in my district. Same thing, we have several areas in the bridge home that are for couples. There's an area for a dog run and for pets. And so those are important barriers to remove so that is not a reason for someone to be on the street.
It's interesting because when we talk about homeless people, I think we tend to think about people living on the streets. But let's talk about people who are homeless and living in their cars.
Yeah.
There's about 16,000 people in Los Angeles. I think they represent about 25% of the homeless population.
Yeah.
So what are some of the measures that you're installing or executing to
and
take care of
actually
this problem?
and in my district it's actually a much larger percentage of the folks are living in their vehicles, and one of the tricky parts is that the way our system traditionally works is that the services tend to go to the folks who have the most acute needs. And someone who's living in their car is typically has less acute needs than someone who is on the street because they've managed to keep it together, they still have a vehicle, they may have fallen into homelessness more recently. And so sadly, a lot of times the services are not available for those folks. So we've looked into things like safe parking. We were able to pioneer a safe parking program, and it's been going on for a couple of years now. My office is adjacent to a public library, and we share a parking lot, and we use that parking lot for safe parking. And that's been a program ongoing for a couple of years now. No real problems with it. I visit regularly with the folks who are utilizing the service. I have dinner with them usually once a quarter. I get some pizza or something and to hear their stories and see how it's going. And these are folks, many of whom have jobs. They're holding it together, but they need just a little bit of help. And it's really the least we can do is give someone a parking space for the evening to lay their head in their car. I mean, it is really not much, but it is not much for the city or for the public to do for someone. But for oftentimes for that person who gets that spot, it's transformative. And again, talking to folks who've been sleeping in their cars, and they say, for months, years, they haven't been able to get a decent night's sleep because they're worried someone's going to knock on their door. It's either going to be, a predator, or or it's going to be an official telling them they can't be there. Whatever it is, they're living in fear. Whereas when you're in a safe parking lot, you're allowed to be there. You're on a list. You're not allowed to just drive up. You have to register, and you're expected.
And there's security, I'm assuming, as well.
There's security on site, and there's a portable restroom on site. Little things make a big difference.
I love that. It's interesting that you talked about, the people we forget because they don't have acute needs. And there's something that you've talked about in the past. You've talked about the missing middle regarding affordable housing. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, we have a major housing crisis right now, or an affordability crisis, I should say, where people are spending more and more of their income on rent, and rent is going higher, at a much faster rate than income, and so people are being squeezed out at at all levels. And we deal a lot with low-income housing, and we're trying to deal with those issues of homelessness. But there's also this missing middle: teachers, firefighters, folks who work every day, honest day's work, and we want them to be in the community.
Yeah, our heroes.
And
especially now with the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, our heroes. And retail workers, all sorts of folks who are serving the community. It's not right that they shouldn't be able to live in the community. I mean, you look at the rent now for an average, studio. It's insane. You cannot afford it on minimum wage, let alone. I mean, you can't afford it on a livable wage, let alone on a minimum wage. And so trying to figure out solutions that not only focus on how do we create subsidized affordable housing, but also how do we create or incentivize housing for that missing middle. One of the ways we do that is through some mandates. Other ways is through incentive programs. In my district, in the Warner Center, we were able to. I'd love to see inclusionary housing in the Warner Center. We haven't been able to get that yet, but we on a sort of project basis, we were able to had a big recent project with Westfield, able to strike a deal with them where they're doing 5% low-income housing and then 5% sort of workforce housing, which is defined as an average 120%, so anywhere between 80% AMI to 150% AMI. It's a start. So I'm trying to do some other things as well to create incentive programs and financial incentives to build housing that is restricted to where the rent is restricted. So we're looking into a couple of creative ideas on that front as well.
Now let's talk about the arts a little bit, because I heard about the Madrid Theater and other initiatives that you're executing to keep like an arts hub in the West Valley.
Yeah, and it's actually not unrelated to the other questions, because part of the way that you prevent homelessness, part of the way that you help the missing middle is through economic development. And so I've been real focused on economic development in my district, particularly in the areas that have been underserved. And two big initiatives on that front. One I think you were referring to is Canoga Park Arts Hub, where we're doing major investments into, we have a Madrid Theater, which is a gem.
Beautiful, yeah.
And it's a real interesting location. It was built originally in 1928. It went through, at one point it was the Pussycat Lounge, and it was used for other things, and then the city, after the earthquake, the city was able to acquire it and use it as a community theater. And but it's been quite used over time, and it really needs an uplift, a facelift. And so we were able to find funding through the CRA, former CRA, excess bond money, take some of that money and leverage it with other dollars. And by putting all the pieces together, we're basically giving, a $10 million facelift to that theater, and it's going to be state of the art moving forward. The plans are there. Gensler is the designer. It's really going to be spectacular, and including a Steinway grand piano that is sort of going to be the centerpiece within it. And so exciting things for that theater. But it's not just the theater. We're trying to create...
It's the ripple effect.
The ripple effect and creating an arts hub. So toward that end, there was another theater across the way. It was a community theater. It used to be called the Clyde Porter Theater. Unfortunately, it was the heirs to that theater decided to sell it off, and it was going to be sold for other purposes, and it really would have been a loss for the community. We figured out a way to acquire that theater and to turn it into an arts incubator and link it up with the Madrid Theater so that it's going to really pop and be part of this cultural arts hub where you can do rehearsals there, you can have smaller productions there. It's going to be owned by the city. It's going to be called the Tosco Theater. And it's going to be part of this cultural arts hub in Canoga Park. It's not just Canoga Park. The biggest economic development that I have going on in my district is in Reseda, which is just west of Canoga Park, or just east of Canoga Park, I should say. And it is what I call the Reseda Rising Initiative. And you're going to see that area, you're already starting to see it, but just massive positive transformation. One of the anchor projects there is, believe it or not, it is a ice skating roller rink.
Oh, wow.
And
would have never guessed that.
No, and that came about kind of in a funny way. We were trying to figure out what to do with this property that was an albatross for the community, had been really dilapidated, was not owned by the city, was owned by the CRA, and I was looking for funds to figure out how can we do something there. And we were turning over every rock, and we came across Proposition K, which is a parks measure that was put together in the 90s. And there was a line in there for an ice skating rink in Reseda. And it was only for, even with interest, it was about $3.9 million. So I take that, and I'm excited. I go to Rec and Parks, and I say, can you build me an ice skating rink? I've got $3.9 million. I know it's from 20 plus years ago, but or almost 30 years ago, but it's there, and we want to use it before this money goes away. And they kind of laughed and said, we can build some ice cubes for that, but we can't build you an ice skating rink. It'd be much more expensive. So we set about figuring out how can we take that seed money and build this ice skating rink that could be a catalytic project for the area.
Ooh, right.
And long story short, I approached the LA Kings and kind of on a whim and talked to Luc Robitaille, who's an amazing guy, and pitched him on being a partner. He was interested. We got the LA Kings interested. They went in. They decided they would be willing to be an equity partner. They're putting in about $6.5 million. We still wasn't enough. Ultimately, we cobbled together almost $27 million.
Oh, wow.
We have the plans done. We're going to start construction this year. We have been tenacious in moving this forward. It is going to be an anchor for the whole Reseda Rising initiative, and I'm really excited about it because it's economic development, it's youth serving, it's subsidized for the community. It is going to be a community rink that is owned by the city. It's going to be managed and run by the LA Kings, and so it has that cachet, and it's going to be wonderful. And it is part and parcel of this Reseda Rising initiative, which, if people are interested, they can go to my website to see all of the different elements. But it includes redoing of the Reseda Theater. It includes major Aliso Creek Park, redoing that. It includes the Reseda Complete Streets. It includes the Sherman Way Great Street program. It includes all of these different elements. A arts walk that we've been doing for a couple of years that we transformed this year into a mural program. So there is a lot of exciting economic development, arts, entertainment, youth, recreation, all packaged together in this Reseda Rising initiative that is really going to be transformative for the area in a very positive way.
I'm amazed at, I knew you were patient, but to rescue a project that's almost 30 years old, I wonder what the philosophy you abide by is.
Well,
aside from patience and determination, which is
well, that one is
pretty obvious.
Is all about. I mean, that has been about trying to find every angle we can and just being tenacious. And I've got a great team, and we've been working hard. Philosophically, in terms of what I believe in good government, trying to ultimately, it's all about how do we improve the quality of life for people. I like that there's a Hubert Humphrey quote I used to hang on. I had a big copy of it blown up. I used to hang it on my wall when I was the budget chair in Sacramento, and it says something to the effect of the moral test of government is how we treat those in the dawn of their life, the children, in the twilight of their life, the elderly, and in the shadows of life, the sick and disabled. And it's a great quote, and I liked when I was the budget chair, particularly to have it front and center, because people would come in with all these requests and sort of they could see where I was coming from. But I think it's a general philosophy about what government is meant to serve all the people, but to really to look after those who have trouble looking after themselves.
So let's look into the future. We've been talking a lot about the present, but now let's talk about the future. So what are the most exciting plans for CD3 that are coming up?
Well, I started touching on some of them. I mean, even though it's the past, it's really about those seeds that we've been planting are about to blossom and are blossoming, like the Reseda Rising initiative in particular. And it's going to take a lot of work to make them blossom the right way. But I see those all of that work paying off in these next few years, and really seeing those areas transform in a positive way. And this is all across my district. In the Woodland Hills Warner Center area as well, we have a tremendous amount of it. It's a different approach there. In Reseda and Canoga Park, it's often how do we really lend a hand to making things happen. And sometimes in the Warner Center, which is growing gangbusters, it's how do we get out of the way sometimes and to help make things happen, because there's already sort of an economic engine that is going, and we feed that in a positive way. We try to make sure that it grows, manage that growth in a positive way. And there's exciting things happening, like with the Westfield project. There's an entertainment center that they're talking about building, a stadium or a entertainment complex that could be up to 10,000 people, could be game changing in the area. But making sure that that's managed properly and that
So in some areas you push, in others you hold their hand, kind of.
Yeah,
You have
yeah.
to manage that difference.
It really, my district is very diverse in that, but in many ways, but economically as well. I've got some areas that are sadly will compete with anywhere in the city on the poverty index, and sort of, really need that extra hand or helping hand, and some areas that are fairly well heeled and doing well economically, but certainly have a lot of issues as well, and throughout that we have obviously the big issues for the city. I mean, getting past COVID is everyone's immediate number one issue, and then homelessness is the other very big issue, which we started to talk about, but I'm really trying to push a number of creative ideas on that, not just for the transitional housing and the permanent supportive housing, which we need to do, but other creative forms of services and of housing. Things, how do we create financial incentives to have affordable housing get built at scale? Because it's not, we as a city, we can't just do, we can't just have these one-off partnerships. Even with all the Triple H money, we have to create systems that will scale themselves.
That makes sense. Is there some way people can stay connected and up to date with what's happening, all the things that are happening in CD3?
There's obviously my website is the easiest way. People come to the website and sign up for my newsletter, social media. Those are great ways. But we also have, if people are more interested in getting involved, I have what's called community action teams. We call them Bobcats. Community action teams. Cat, Bobcat. Yeah. So we have one on economic development, and they have been doing great work in terms of working with local businesses, putting together forums. I've had the longest standing one I had is on emergency preparedness. That's been a focus for me. After the '94 earthquake, I was working for Congressman Berman at the time, and that changed my life. I mean, I focused on that after that earthquake hit for the next couple of years, just helping people get back on their feet. And so that was been seared into my consciousness about the importance of being prepared. And so I have a community action team made up of volunteers, and they focus on emergency preparedness. And in fact, we probably I'm the only elected official in the country probably who has 2 warehouses full of forward deployed emergency supplies.
Oh, wow.
And so with my community action team, we try to be prepared and have these supplies forward deployed both in warehouses and these what's called a V-pod, putting these pods in various locations. And it's already proved incredibly useful, like after the Woolsey fire, after a number of the fires that have been out there, my teams were the first ones to immediately fill the Red Cross shelters with needed supplies, like within an hour. We have, during one of those fires, we had, our supplies were wearing down. We opened up basically a donation center, and we were flooded with people because people were starting to donate directly to the different emergency shelters, and the shelters were getting overwhelmed. So we took on that role and said, okay, instead of doing that, everyone, here's a central location, let's make the donations here, we'll sort them, we'll figure out what people need, and we'll get them the supplies immediately. And so we took on that role. And that community action team has really been blossoming, not just in my district, but has been doing work citywide and regionally. So I'm very proud of them and the work that we've been able to do together. But I have other community action teams. We have one on domestic violence, local community members who want to focus on that issue, and we put together forums and try to work with some of the local shelters and groups. So I've got a number of these community action teams, one on homelessness. It's a way to engage with community members who want to be focused on a particular issue. And then, of course, there's neighborhood councils and other ways that people can get involved.
So now we know how we can become Bobcats.
You can become a member of a Bobcat and be on the team locally on and if there's a particular issue, if it's beautification, we have a Bobcat for that too, and we work with folks who want to do volunteer cleanups and that kind of thing. Thank you so much for being here, Council Member. Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you. Time went by very quick. Thank you so much for watching. This is Natalia Bilbao for LA Currents. Have a great rest of your day.